Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I start by wishing yourself, Mr. Speaker, and all members of the House and everyone who works in the House a very happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, our late colleague Jo Cox will not be celebrating Christmas this year with her family. She was murdered and taken from us. So I hope the Prime Minister, I'm sure she will, join me in encouraging people to download the song which many members helped to create as a tribute to Jo's life and work and in everlasting memory of her.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise this issue. I'm sure everybody in this House, we should send a very clear message. Download this single for the Jo Cox Foundation. It's a very important cause. We all recognise that Jo Cox was a fine member of this House and would have carried on contributing significantly to this House and to this country had she not been brutally murdered. It's right. I think the Chancellor's waiving the VAT on this single. I think everybody involved in it has, in fact, gave their services for free. I'm having a photograph with MP4 later this afternoon. And once again, let's just encourage everybody to download this single.
The Prime Minister was, of course, referring, for the benefit of those observing our proceedings outside, to the outstanding parliamentary rock band MP4. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I applaud the work of MP4, but for the benefit of their quality, I'm not a member of it. I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, social care is crucial. It provides support for people to live with dignity. Yet, Age UK research has found that 1.2 million older people are currently not receiving the care that they need. Will the Prime Minister accept there is a crisis in social care?
I've consistently said in this House that we recognise the pressures that there are on social care. So it might be helpful if I actually set out what the government is doing and the position in relation to social care. So I say we recognise those pressures. That's why the government is putting more money into social care through the Better Care Fund. And by the end of this Parliament, that will be billions of pounds extra. It's why we have enabled the social care precept for local authorities. We recognise that there are immediate pressures on social care. That's why this will be addressed by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, in the Local Government Finance Settlement tomorrow. But we also recognise that this is not just about money, it is about delivery. There is a difference in delivery across the country. We need to make sure that reform is taking place so we see best practice in terms of integration of health and social care across the country. But we also need to ensure that we have a longer-term solution to give people the reassurance for the future that there is a sustainable system that will ensure that they are receiving the social care that they need in old age. And that is what the government is working on. There's a short-term issue, there's a medium-term need to make sure local authorities and health service are delivering consistently, and there's a long-term solution that we need to find.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Care Quality Commission has warned as recently as October that evidence suggests we've approached a tipping point. So instead of passing the buck on to local government, shouldn't the government take responsibility itself for the crisis? Yes. Could the Prime Minister take this opportunity to inform the House exactly how much was cut from the social care budget in the last Parliament?
Yeah. We have been putting more money into social care and health. Well, we have been putting more money into social care and health. As I say, we recognise the pressures that exist. That's why we will be looking at the short-term. We are looking at the short-term pressures that exist in relation to social care. But you cannot look at this question as simply being an issue of money in the short term. It is about delivery. It is about reform. It is about the social care system working with the health system. That's why this is an issue that is being addressed not just by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, but also the Secretary of State for Health. But if we're going to give people the reassurance that they need in the longer term that their social care needs will be met, this isn't just about looking for a short-term solution. It's about finding a way forward that can give a sustainable system of social care for the future.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to be aware that £4.6 billion was cut from the social care budget in the last Parliament, and that her talk of putting it on to local governments ought to be taken for what it is, a con. 2% of council tax is clearly a nonsense. 95% of councils use this social care precept, and it raised less than 3% of the money they plan to spend on adult social care. Billions seem to be available for tax giveaways to corporations, not mentioned in the autumn statement, underfunded, and many elderly people left isolated and in crisis because of the lack of government's funding of social care.
We see many councils around the country that have taken the benefit of the social care precept and have, as a result, actually seen more people being able to access social care and needs being met. Sadly, there are also some councils across the country, some Labour councils, who haven't taken that opportunity, where we do see a worse performance in relation to social care. But the Right Honourable Gentleman once again refers to the issue of money. I might remind him that at the last election, the then Shadow Chancellor said that if Labour were in government, there would be not a penny more for local authorities, and also that when recently asked about spending more money on social care, the Labour's Shadow Health Secretary said, when he was asked where the money would come from, he said, we're going to have to come up with a plan for that.
Mr. Speaker, this government has cut social care, and she well knows it, and she well knows the effects of that. She also well knows that raising council tax has a different outcome in different parts of the country. For example, if you raise the council tax in Windsor and Maidenhead, you get quite a lot of money. If you raise the council tax precept in Liverpool or Newcastle, you get a lot less. Is she saying that older people, frail elderly, vulnerable people, are less valuable in our big cities than they are in wealthier parts of the country? Mr. Speaker, this crisis is a crisis for many elderly people who are living in a very difficult situation because of this. It's also a crisis for the National Health Service. Those people who are in hospital cannot be discharged because there's nowhere for them to go to. So I'll ask her again. The crisis affects individuals, it affects families, and it affects the National Health Service. So why doesn't she do something really bold? Cancel the corporation tax cut and put the money into social care instead.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman has quoted Newcastle Council in the list that he set there. I have to say Newcastle Council is one of the councils where we saw in September virtually no delayed discharges. So elderly people were not being held up in hospital when they didn't need to be and when they didn't want to be. So what this shows is that it is possible for councils to deliver on the ground. So you see councils like Newcastle and Torbay doing that. Then you see councils like Ealing not using the social care precept, and a different result. The difference between the worst performing council in relation to delayed discharges and the best is a 20-fold difference. That's not about the difference of funding, it's about the difference of delivery.
Mr. Speaker, councils work very hard to try to cope with a 40% cut in their budgets across the whole country. And the people who pay the price are those who are stuck in hospital, who should be allowed to go home, and those that aren't getting the care and support they need. This is a social care system that's deep in crisis. The crisis is made in Downing Street by this government. The former chair of the Health Select Committee, Stephen Dorrell, says the system is inadequately funded. The current chair of the Health Select Committee, and I quote, says the issue can't be ducked any longer because the impact it's having not just on vulnerable people but also on the NHS. Why can't the Prime Minister listen to those in local government, to the King's Fund, the NHS Confederation, her own council leaders, and recognise this social care crisis forces people to give up work to care for loved ones because there isn't a system to do it? makes people stay in hospital longer than they should, and leads people into a horrible, isolated life when they should be cared for by all of us through a properly funded social care system. Get a grip and fund it properly, please.
The issue of social care is indeed one that has been ducked by governments for too long. That is why it is this government that will provide a long-term, sustainable system for social care that gives reassurance to people. But when he talks about governments ducking social care, let's look about 13 years of Labour in government. In 1997, they said they'd sort it in their manifesto. They had a Royal Commission in 1999, a Green Paper in 2005, the One List report in 2006. In 2007, in the CSR, they said they'd sort it. In 2009, they had another Green Paper. 13 years and no action whatsoever.
Mr. Speaker, we join with the leader of the Labour Party and with the Prime Minister in wishing great success to the Joe Cox single that's available for download on Friday. We're sure we're all going to download it. Mr. Speaker, civilians have suffered grievously with the bombing of hospitals, of schools, of markets. The United Nations believes that 60% of civilian casualties are caused by airstrikes. In the last 24 hours, the United States has stopped the supply of precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen. When will the UK follow suit?
As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, we do have a very strict regime of export licences in relation to weapons here in the United Kingdom. We exercise that very carefully, and in recent years we have indeed refused export licences in relation to arms, including to Yemen and Saudi Arabia.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
The US government has just said that, and I quote, "Systematic endemic problems in Saudi Arabia's targeting drove the US decision to halt a future weapons sale involving precision-guided munitions." The Saudis have UK-supplied precision-guided Paveway 4 missiles. They're made in Scotland. The UK has licensed £3.3 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia since the beginning of the bombing campaign. What will it take for the UK to adopt an ethical foreign policy when it comes to Yemen?
Well, as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, the intervention in Yemen is a UN-backed intervention. As I've said previously, where there are allegations of breaches of international humanitarian law, then we require those to be properly investigated. We do have a relationship with Saudi Arabia. The security of the Gulf is important to us, and I would simply also remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that actually Saudi intelligence, the counter-terrorism links we have with Saudi Arabia, the intelligence we get from Saudi Arabia has saved potentially hundreds of lives here in the UK.